Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to do a review of the Retroid Pocket 6. Now I've had my hands on it for a couple weeks now, and I've already done an early impressions video. I will leave it linked down below in case you missed it. In that video I mostly focused on the nitty-gritty, things like how the buttons feel, how the screen looks, how it feels in the hands, all that stuff that you can make a snap judgment about. In today's video I'm going to recap all of those early impressions and then build upon it and really focus on some fundamental questions about what it's like to own the Retroid Pocket 6 and whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you. And I think I've narrowed it down to two major questions that we're going to try to answer here today. The first is whether or not the Retroid Pocket 6 is worth it, and the second one is whether or not it's worth upgrading to if you already have something very similar. And without spoiling the rest of the video too much, I think that the first one's a pretty easy answer and the second one is a bit more complicated. So strap in, grab your favorite snack and drink, and let's go ahead and get started. Okay, to start, I want to do a quick recap of the 42-minute impressions video I did a couple weeks back, just in case you've forgotten a couple of the details, or maybe you didn't get a chance to catch it. The Retroid Pocket 6 is what I would consider to be at the upper tier of a mid-range handheld. It's not the most powerful or expensive one out there, but it's got a ton of features for the price. It's got the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor inside of it and a 5.5-inch 1080p AMOLED display, which now has a 120Hz refresh rate. It's also an Android-based handheld, which means it's going to function a lot like a phone or a tablet, but with built-in controls. As far as pricing, it starts at $230 before shipping, and that's for 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage. If you want to upgrade the RAM to 12 gigs and internal storage up to 256, that's going to cost you $50 more. That will then be $280 before shipping. The Retroid Pocket 6 is also unique in that you can choose between whether or not you want the D-pad up top or down below, depending on the control scheme and the type of game you plan on playing. In general, I'd recommend D-pad up top if you're going to be focusing mostly on retro games, but analog stick up top will work a lot better for a more modern control scheme. The device itself is quite compact for everything that you're getting. It's a little bit smaller than a Nintendo Switch Lite, and you can still put it in your pocket, but I wouldn't necessarily consider it to be pocketable just because it is a little bit thick and tall. Instead, I would consider this to be ultra portable in that you can throw it in a case and chuck it in your bag, and it doesn't take up that much room. It's got ergonomic bumps on the back of it, which allow you to grip it a little bit more easily, and the bumps are quite protruding, more so than the original Retroid Pocket 5. It's also got decent sized triggers to it, which are analog input, and they allow you to get a pretty good grip on the handheld itself. It's to the point where I can play a modern first-person shooter game on it and still enjoy the overall experience. I think it'll benefit more from having an additional grip add-on to it, but I didn't get one in time for testing for this review, so that's going to have to come in a future video. In fact, there were a few things I was hoping to get before making this video, but unfortunately they didn't arrive on time. They'll be coming next week. So that's going to include that grip I was just talking about, including a screen protector, and then also my own retail model. This one that we're testing here today is a review unit. And so be on the lookout in about a week for another video where I'm going to compare the different colors between them and then those additional attachments. I'm a big fan of the controls on this Retroid Pocket 6. The D-pad is clicky and accurate, and the analog sticks have a wide range of motion, and they feel really smooth. They have magnetic hall sensors. But my favorite upgrade on the Retroid Pocket 6 are these new buttons. They still have a rubber membrane connection, so they have a bit of a classic feel to them, but they are light to the touch, and they are virtually silent. That was one of my main complaints about the Retroid Pocket 5, is that the buttons felt a little bit clacky, but thankfully the new Retroid Pocket 6 is much quieter. I'd say it's about half the overall volume. The audio on this device is decent. I wouldn't say it's anything to write home about, but it sounds pretty good. A little bit muffled, but in general I think it's nice and clear. This new screen is also excellent. Much like the Retroid Pocket 5, it is AMOLED and super vibrant, but it also has a 120Hz refresh rate, so it is an improvement over the original. They've also got a new and more robust cooling system in the Retroid Pocket 6, which keeps the temperatures down very low. The hottest I ever saw this device get internally was 70 degrees Celsius when playing the hardest to run games. Everything else is a lot cooler. In general, I leave the fan in smart mode, which means it's going to ramp up when it needs it, and I found this to be an excellent fit. It gets a little bit loud at the very highest setting, but it's only really going to kick in with the hardest to run games. It can get a little bit loud at that point, but I would say it's no worse than any other similar handheld. As far as price to performance, I think it punches above its weight class. It's usually a lot more performant than other handhelds at a similar price point. And then if you look at handhelds that have a similar level of performance, those are usually a lot more expensive, $50 to $100 each. There are quite a few other devices out there with the same Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 or equivalent processor, and those are all more expensive, but the performance will be roughly the same. When it comes to emulation, it's an excellent fit no matter what you're doing. When you're playing retro games, you can turn on all the highest settings, so a really heavy-duty shader, including CRT Beam Simulator, which will improve motion clarity, and then you can also turn on Run Ahead to have a very nice retro gaming experience. It also does a great job with higher-end emulation, which we will test further in this video since I only did a quick preview in my last one. Beyond just emulation, we've got enough power here to play some heavy-duty Android games too, so if you're looking at playing something like Destiny Rising or your favorite racing game, those should play just fine here. It's also a very capable, compact streaming handheld. For example, here with local streaming with Apollo and Artemis, I'm getting 2.5 seconds decoding time on average, so that's going to be a really excellent fit if you want to stream games onto your device too. So in summary, my initial impressions of the Retroid Pocket 6 were quite positive. There are a lot of good things going on with this handheld. At the same time, I did have a couple things that I wish were a little bit better, so let's go into detail about each of those and how it's changed over the past couple weeks. So number one is that the front glass panel feels a little bit smudgier than other handhelds I've tested before. They're using a special coating on it, and it does pick up fingerprints really easily, and it's hard to get them to wipe off. I've had similar issues with other handhelds, but it's usually with those that are much cheaper, so it's a little bit strange to see it on the Retroid Pocket 6. I'm just not a fan of this particular coating. I've been doing some testing over the past couple of weeks with different types of microfiber cloths. Usually I use something like this, which is made for eyeglasses, but I found that something like this, which is more textured, works a little bit better with this particular coating and screen. So this is what I would recommend. The company that makes these cloths is called Whoosh, and I'll leave a link down below. Somebody recommended them to me, and yes, they're a big improvement over the typical ones that I usually use, so that might be an easy fix. I've also got one of their tempered glass screen protectors on its way, and so as soon as I get that, I will also include that in my next video. I'm thinking that this will be a lot easier to wipe down too. Another initial nitpick I had about the Retroid Pocket 6 is the slick plastic texture on the back of it. The original Retroid Pocket 5 had a much bumpier texture, and I really enjoyed that, but this seems to be a complete opposite. The new models have this late 90s, early 2000s sheen to them, which is really cool and very reminiscent of the PSP, but I personally am not a huge fan of how it feels in the hands. I think it's just a little bit slick, and I like a grippier texture overall. However, over the past couple weeks of testing, I will say that I've just kind of got used to it. I mean, it's not like it feels any better. It still kind of annoys me, but I don't really think about it anymore. I just start playing my game, and it just kind of falls into the background. So not necessarily something that I think is a deal breaker, but it is definitely a nitpick, but one that I got used to over time. And then finally, my last gripe was very subjective, but it felt like it was a bit of a generic design. There's nothing that we can really do about it now, but it just kind of hurts because initially the top design was what the Retroid Pocket 6 was going to look like, but then they had a community poll, and then everyone voted for the bottom design, which is the generic one that we have here today. And unfortunately, yeah, that one won, and I really do think that the top design would have been better in many different ways, probably more ergonomic, and I like the idea of having 4 function buttons on the bottom. It looks like a PSP. And the speaker placement would have been better too. And so that's a recap of my impressions video for the Retroid Pocket 6. There's a lot to like about the handheld, and a couple nitpicks that honestly I got used to over the past couple weeks. And so now let's talk about the actual review and talk about some of the items I didn't get to in my impressions video, and then start wrapping it up with comparisons against other handhelds, and then answering those 2 questions from the intro. So number one, yes, the Retroid Pocket 6 has video out, and it works really well with a bunch of different docks and USB adapters. Basically anything that will give you video out will probably work with this handheld. I did most of my testing with the official dock. It's $30, and it gives you a bunch of different options, including 4 USB ports, HDMI, as well as an Ethernet adapter. It is worth noting the USB-C port on the bottom of the Retroid Pocket 6 is not perfectly centered, so it is going to be a little bit off-center when you put it in the dock, but yes, it will fit. In the device settings, you've got a bunch of different output options, and I personally have been using 1080p 120Hz because that perfectly matches the actual display. If you've got a TV or monitor with 120Hz refresh rate, that means that all of your settings and configurations are just going to carry over naturally over into the extended display. So here I am playing Super Nintendo with the CRT Beam Simulator shader and the CRT shader on top of that, and everything looks great. It plays really well. So if you are looking for an all-in-one handheld where you can dock it and play it on a larger screen, connect it with a Bluetooth controller, all that is going to be an excellent experience here. Another thing that takes a little bit longer to test is battery testing, so let's talk about my results here. On the top right, you can see that my settings were 50% brightness and volume, and then also I got a 2% standby drain overnight. That means that when I put it to sleep and then checked it the next morning, it only reduced by 2%. Let's start on the far right. This is going to be our best case scenario. So I'm playing Final Fantasy VI Advance on the Game Boy Advance via RetroArch with the LCD 3X shader and just playing it in the standard performance mode. And here I got a little bit under 12.5 hours of battery life. It is worth noting that for this game and all the others that we're testing here, I kept the screen at 120 Hz to improve input latency. And so that's what we're seeing here. And I think this is an excellent amount of time to play with a lighter weight game. From there, I jumped immediately into the higher end stuff. So I started with God of War 2 using a 2.5x resolution, which is 1080p. And then I played it at the middle performance mode. And here I got 5.5 hours of battery life, which is pretty great. Moving on from there, I went up to something a little bit harder to run, which is Metroid Prime Remastered with the Odin emulator for Nintendo Switch. This is not the hardest to run Nintendo Switch game, but it is a little bit on the heavier side. So this I'm playing in docked mode, which means 1080p, and I'm running the device itself in high performance mode, and I got a little bit over 4 hours of battery life. Again, I think that's excellent. There are definitely going to be Switch games that are going to have less battery life than this, but I think this is a good middle ground. Moving on from there, I went into PC gaming with GameHub, and I played Fallout 3 at 1080p medium settings with the high performance mode on the device, and here I got about 3 hours and 45 minutes altogether, so a little bit less than Nintendo Switch, and this game runs at about 80% of the GPU's power, so you can definitely play harder to run games. You'll get less battery life than that too, but I think this also gives you a good general idea of what PC gaming is going to be like. I would expect somewhere between 3 and 4 hours depending on the game. And then finally, we've got our worst case scenario on the far left. This is Wildlife Extreme Benchmark. So this is going to push the GPU to 100% the entire time. And you can see here that running this over and over again in the high performance mode, I got 3 hours and 20 minutes of battery life. The Retroid Pocket 6 has a 6,000 milliamp hour battery, which is an upgrade over the Retroid Pocket 5. And even though the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is a more powerful and demanding processor, we're still getting very similar battery life all around. So personally, when it comes to the amount of game time that you can expect from the Retroid Pocket 6, I think this is an excellent experience. Next, I want to talk a little bit more in depth about high-end emulation. I touched upon this briefly in my impressions video, but over the past 2 weeks, I've really done a deep dive. Now, to be fair, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is a tried and true processor. This first came out on the Odin 2 back in 2023, so I've been testing this thing for about 2.5 years at this point, and all the results that I saw here were exactly the same as they were on the original Odin 2. This means that when playing Gen 6 systems like Nintendo GameCube, you can play these at a 3x resolution, and every single game is going to play just fine. There might be a couple with compatibility issues, but those are pretty few and far between. For the most part, I leave the graphical backend on OpenGL versus Vulkan. It's a little bit more demanding, but it is more accurate, so more games are just going to run out of the box, and this chipset has enough power to be able to play these games at a 3x upscale, even with OpenGL. From there, if I ever find any sort of slowdown, for example with Rogue Squadron 2, one of the most demanding games on GameCube, this one does bog down a bit with OpenGL at a 3x resolution, but this is an easy fix. I just switch it over to Vulkan, and that's about it. And so with very few exceptions, I would say that GameCube and Nintendo Wii are both very plug-and-play systems with these particular settings. It's going to be a very similar experience with PlayStation 2. I leave it on OpenGL, I turn on the no interlace and widescreen patches, and then I just start playing my games at a 2.5x resolution, and for the most part, all these games are going to play just fine. Like with GameCube, there might be a couple that would benefit from switching over to the Vulkan backend, but in general, I've just found that OpenGL gives me better accuracy and the chipset is powerful enough to handle it. There are two different versions of NetherSX2. There's the patch version and the classic version, and it really depends on what type of games you plan on playing. I generally will use the classic version. This allows most of the games that I like to play just fine, including the Sly Cooper games, which run better on the classic version of this app. Now, there are over 2,000 games on the PS2 catalog, and so it's hard to say that every single game is going to play just fine with the classic version. There are some specifically, like the Snowblind games, like Champions of Norrath and the Baldur's Gate games. Those ones will play better with the patch version of NetherSX2. The only unfortunate thing about PS2 emulation right now is that you cannot install both versions of nitpicks 2 at once. You have to pick one or the other. My advice is to start with the classic version and then try out the patch one if any certain games do not work properly. But for the most part, I think it'll be relatively plug and play, much like it is with GameCube and Wii. Another system I tested is Nintendo Wii U. Now this one just recently had an update last month, and I'm seeing some pretty big improvements in overall compatibility. The latest versions of this app allow us to also import in third-party turnip drivers, which improves accuracy in general, and so I found that most Nintendo Wii U games play absolutely fine. A recent example is Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, which usually is very buggy, but I found it worked perfectly fine with the latest version of the app and running with turnip drivers. I think two of my favorite experiences with this particular emulator are Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD. Both of these run absolutely fine at 1080p and then the native 30 frames per second that these games run at, and no problem here whatsoever. I also prefer to play the Wii U version of Breath of the Wild because I find it very easy to implement cheats on this one, and so this also runs very well. I found it gets about 30 frames per second in high performance mode when in the open world environment, and then once you go into a shrine it'll usually go up to 60 frames per second. So in general, a very good and playable experience. Another system I didn't test in my first video but I wanted to show off here is Nintendo 3DS running the latest version of Azahar. We've got plenty of performance to play these games at a 4x resolution upscale. The major issue here is going to be compatibility because there are still some 3DS games that don't run properly on this emulator. It's worth noting that this is the exact same chipset as the AYN Thor, a dual screen device, which I think is a better way to play Nintendo 3DS games, but you can still play them in single screen mode here as well. And then finally, the last system I did some in-depth testing with is Nintendo Switch. So I'm running the latest version of the Odin emulator and also installed the recommended turnip drivers. Now Switch emulation is not perfect. It's going to suffer from some compatibility issues depending on the game. You'll still find crashes and other glitches and whatnot here and there. I tried out about 30 different games, those that I have tested out previously with this chipset and found success, and I found the exact same results here. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is one of my favorite ways to play Nintendo Switch games because it's got a good amount of power to it, and it's got wide compatibility thanks to those third-party drivers. The way I play these games is in docked mode, which is going to be 1080p for the most part. It really depends on the game, and playing these games at this high of a resolution with a 5.5-inch AMOLED display is super sharp and crisp, and the colors really pop. And I mentioned earlier that 5.5 inches is the same screen size as the Nintendo Switch Lite, and so this feels like a wholly upgraded version of that handheld console because we're playing the same games, but in an upscaled resolution with an OLED panel. So yeah, this is a really great experience if you want something small and compact that's powerful enough to play Switch games. One more platform where I did some in-depth testing is GameHub. This allows me to play PC games directly from my Steam account, including my Steam cloud saves. There are quite a few apps out right now that allow us to play these PC games, including GameHub, which I used here, but then also one called Game Native that also works really well. Like with other Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 handhelds, I found that I get the best success when playing more lightweight PC games, those that are less demanding. After all, these games are playing through a translation layer, so it's not going to give you the same performance as something like a handheld PC. The nice thing about the Retroid Pocket 6 is it has that 120Hz refresh rate display, so some of these games will actually support 120 frames per second and gives you a much more smooth and clean experience. Like with any of these handhelds, I wouldn't go as far as to say the Retroid Pocket 6 could replace a PC handheld like a Steam Deck, but I think with lightweight games, when you're trying to just get in and out and you want to also, make progress on your Steam cloud save, it's a wonderful added bonus. You can definitely push the device further and try to play some AAA titles, but I found that Xbox 360 era games, those from about 15 years ago or so, are usually some of the best PC games to play. They're still very impressive, they've got 3D visuals to them, and you can also play them at a 1080p resolution without bogging down the system too hard. And so this is about the era of game that I personally like to play, or I like to play something a little bit more modern and lightweight. Not every game is going to boot through this compatibility layer, especially if it has DRM embedded into it. And then also bear in mind that, some may not be optimized for the GameHub experience and they may play below 30 frames per second. So it's really going to depend on the game and its compatibility, but in general, I think it's definitely a path worth exploring for these particular handhelds. Bear in mind that the Retroid Pocket 6 only has 128 or 256 gigs of internal storage, and by default, all of these apps are going to store these games on that internal storage. So you are quite limited in the games that you can install. Another reason why I prefer to play some of these lightweight titles instead. Either way, I can confirm that yes, the performance here with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 on the Retroid Pocket 6 is identical to other Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 handhelds. Now for the next part of this video, I want to compare the Retroid Pocket 6 to the variety of other similar handhelds we already have in this space. I think that many of the people watching these videos already have something kind of like the Retroid Pocket 6 and are wondering whether or not it'll be worth an upgrade from that one to this one. So we're going to break it down handheld by handheld and give you just some quick tips here and there, depending on the device that you own. So let's start with the Retroid Pocket 5. This one is about $30 cheaper than the Retroid Pocket 6 and is obviously from a previous generation. This one's been out for about a year and a half at this point. The screen and overall size of these two handhelds is very similar. They're both 5.5 inches AMOLED. This one's only 60 Hz compared to 120, but overall it's going to be a very general similar feel. The Retroid Pocket 5 also does an excellent job with retro gaming and even some modern stuff too. You can play up through PS2 and GameCube for the most part with some upscaling depending on the game, but there is going to be a difference in performance here where the Retroid Pocket 6 will probably be able to play more PS2 and GameCube games at a higher resolution, and it's also going to do better with Switch and PC gaming as well. You can still play some lightweight Switch games and PC games on the Retroid Pocket 5, but if you're really trying to push the envelope, then the Retroid Pocket 6 is going to give you more headroom. If you've already got a Retroid Pocket 5, I would find it hard to upgrade to the Retroid Pocket 6 just because they are quite similar in terms of overall form factor and feel, and it really is going to come down to those high-end systems and how important they are to you. On the other hand, if you've got something a little bit older, like a Retroid Pocket 4 or Retroid Pocket 3, then I think that the upgrade path is going to make a little bit more sense if you want to play some higher-end systems. Next up, we have the Retroid Pocket G2. Now, this is almost identical to the Retroid Pocket 5, just with a chipset upgrade. So it's kind of like a Retroid Pocket 5 Pro. The screen, the controls, all of that are going to be identical to the Retroid Pocket 5, but this one has the upgraded Snapdragon G2 Gen 2 processor. In terms of performance, it's actually quite close to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but it doesn't have the same wide range of compatibility and third-party driver support as the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. It's close, but not quite there. The G2 is actually $220, so it's only $10 cheaper than the Retroid Pocket 6, and if you're looking for the best bang for your buck between the two, I do think that the Retroid Pocket 6 has more features. This one's got that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, which is more powerful, and then also a 120 Hz display, and the ability to decide whether or not you want to have the D-pad or the stick up top, which the other two do not. The only main advantage the RPG2 had over the Retroid Pocket 6 was that this one came out a few months earlier, even though they were announced at the same time. So there was a point where it kind of made sense if you wanted something before the holidays to get the RPG2, but now that they're both out, I think it is worth spending the additional $10 to get the Retroid Pocket 6 for the better screen, the better chipset, and the ability to customize your controls. The only other advantage the RPG2 has over the RP6 is that it has that grippy texture on the back, which is also very subjective. So this might push you one way or the other, but personally I think the features in the RP6 make it a better deal. Next, I want to compare the Retroid Pocket 6 to the Odin 2 line of devices. Now, there are three different models here, the OG, as well as the Mini, and the Portal. I did a whole video contrasting all three of these different models. I'll leave that link down below if you haven't seen that as well, but we're going to kind of lump them all together because they have the exact same processor, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the same one found in the Retroid Pocket 6. Let's start by comparing the Retroid Pocket 6 to the original Odin 2. This was my favorite handheld for many years because it was the first with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with that awesome performance and compatibility. The screen on this is a little bit bigger. I also find the Odin 2 to be more comfortable because it is a bit bigger and taller, and so it just feels like I got more space for my hands overall. But this screen is definitely worse than the Retroid Pocket 6. This one is LCD and it's prone to ghosting, and it also doesn't have very saturated or vibrant colors. And so even though I like the larger size of this screen, I think this screen in general is just a much better panel. I think in terms of comfort, the Odin 2 still wins for me because it is a little bit roomier. I like handhelds that are a little bit taller, but the Retroid Pocket 6 is nice and compact as well. I think it goes without saying, but the way I see it, if you've got an Odin 2 or something with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, I don't really see it worth upgrading to the Retroid Pocket 6 just because it's the exact same performance, and I don't think it's worth spending $230+ just to have an improved panel. Next, we have the Odin 2 Mini, which in many ways is very similar to the Retroid Pocket 6. They're both very small and compact. You can have the option to have the analog stick up top. They both have these crystal buttons that I think feel very nice. But this one is a little bit smaller. It also has a smaller display. It's only 5 inches. This one is also mini LED, which I don't think is a very good technology on a handheld compared to OLED. And so in general, I think that the screen is a lot better. It also goes up to 120 Hertz. The beauty of the Mini is that this one is a flat handheld on the back, which is kind of rare, and this allows you to easily swap between the stick up top and the D-pad down below. By contrast, the Retroid Pocket 6 has these big ergonomic bumps, which do kind of force your hands to be in one specific position, and it makes it a little bit harder to shift down to the D-pad compared to the Odin 2 Mini. And so I think that's the main advantage of the Odin 2 Mini, is that it's comfortable in many different ways compared to the Retroid Pocket 6, which I feel like is either going to be analog stick centric or D-pad centric, and switching from one to the other is going to be a compromise. As far as whether or not to choose between one or the other, it's actually a pretty easy answer, because the Odin 2 Mini has now been discontinued by AYN. They no longer sell it on their website, so you'd have to find it on the used marketplace. But in general, even if you could find these for a similar price point, I think I would prefer the Retroid Pocket 6. I've just never been a very big fan of the Odin 2 Mini screen. Next, we have the Odin 2 Portal, which again has the exact same processor as the Retroid Pocket 6, but this one is much bigger. It's got a 7-inch, 120Hz OLED panel, so very similar specs to the Retroid Pocket 6, but much larger. In that way, if you have a hard time seeing on a 5.5-inch display, then 7 inches is obviously going to be a better fit in that regard. But there are some things about this device that I think are worse than the Retroid Pocket 6, especially the face buttons, which are quite loud on the Odin 2 Portal compared to the RP6 in general. So the way I see it, the Odin 2 Portal is going to be excellent if you want a large screen device, but if you want something more compact, then the Retroid Pocket 6 is going to be a better fit in general. Next, we've got the AYN Thor, again a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 handheld, but this one is quite unique. It's a clamshell with a dual screen setup, and so this is pretty awesome in general. It's got a 6-inch display, 120Hz OLED, so a little bit bigger than on the Retroid Pocket 6, and it also obviously has those two screens, so you can play things like 3DS a lot better. I think the big difference between the two is really going to come down to multitasking, whether or not you want to have one game playing up top and then maybe watching a video down below or something similar to that. Or if you want to play 3DS and DS games, obviously this is going to be a better fit. Or if you just like the clamshell form factor, something you can close up and then chuck in a bag without having to use a case. So all those things are in the Thor's favor. And this is one of my favorite handhelds in general right now, and it mostly has to do with the form factor and the fact that we have just a lot of fun things we can do with a dual screen output. The main advantage the Retroid Pocket 6 has to me is the overall comfort of playing this, because it is quite compromised to play on the Thor. It's kind of boxy and squarish, and so it's not an ideal setup compared to the Retroid Pocket 6 in that one regard. So again, it really depends on what you're looking for here. I think the Thor is probably a device I've gotten a little bit more fun out of compared to the Retroid Pocket 6, but the RP6 is also more comfortable. Up next, we have the Conquer Pocket Fit. This is made by Ioneo, and it has the Snapdragon G3 Gen 3 in it. So that's essentially the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, so a generation ahead of what you can find in the Retroid Pocket 6, and it does have better performance. This one also has a fair price point. It's $270 starting, which is only $40 more than the Retroid Pocket 6, which I think is actually a pretty good deal for what you're getting. This one has a larger 6-inch display, but it is not OLED, it's LCD, although it does go up to 144 Hertz. The main disadvantage of the Conquer Pocket Fit has to do with Ioneo and their fulfillment issues. I've been talking about this a lot in a lot of videos previously, but essentially they have not been able to ship their devices on time, and there are people who ordered this back in October and are still waiting for theirs to be delivered as of today. Ioneo has made some big promises about fixing their fulfillment and quality control issues, but I think it's worth being cautious, just because whether or not they make a promise and whether or not they fulfill it is a different story. So the way I see it, there might come a time when the Conquer Pocket Fit might be a better handheld to pick up, but just knowing Ioneo's track record and how long it's been taking to ship them, I think it's a little bit too risky. And then finally, we've got the Odin 2. This is the granddaddy of them all. It's by far the most powerful handheld available on the market today. This one has the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which is a full another generation ahead of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and it's got about double the performance power of the Retroid Pocket 6. It's also got a larger display, 6 inches AMOLED, 120 Hertz, and it's also got some really nice ergonomic controls to it too, and it also has that grippy texture on the back that I love so much. And so there are many reasons why I absolutely love the Odin 3. If you're looking to play PC games, that's where this additional power really comes into play, because this will play through games on GameHub and Game Native much better. You can play AAA games on this one compared to the more lightweight stuff I would recommend with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. However, there is one disadvantage of the Snapdragon 8 Elite in that this one does not have any official third-party driver support just yet. It's in the works, and there are many forks that are popping out here and left and right, but we don't have anything from the Turnip driver team officially just yet. When that happens, I think that we will see big improvements in Switch emulation performance on this device in particular. Right now, your better bet for Switch emulation is the Retroid Pocket 6 because this is more tried and true and more compatible, but I think that in the future, the Odin 3 will probably take that crown away. So the way I see it, the Odin 3 is still a device that's coming into its own, where it's going to get better and better over time, but as of right now, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 in the Retroid Pocket 6 is much more tried and true. There's only about a $100 difference between the two at the low spec model, which is really impressive, and I think it says a lot about the Odin 3 and the Retroid Pocket 6 at the same time. So beyond just the driver issues that we have with the Odin 3, I think that in general, this one is just a much better handheld. It's more comfortable to hold, it's got a bigger screen. I like the feel of this device in general more than the Retroid Pocket 6, even though this one is still very comfortable to hold. At the end of the day, it feels like both of these devices are at the top of their own respective game, where the Retroid Pocket 6, as far as Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 devices go, it's got a lot going for it. Same thing with that higher end with the Odin 3, where this one feels like a next generation product. So if you're trying to choose between the two, I think it really comes down to budget and then also how tolerant you are of the growing pains that the Odin 3 is still going through. So wrapping things up here, let's go back to those two questions that we made in the beginning of this video. Is the Retroid Pocket 6 worth it, and is it worth upgrading to if you've got something else? In answer to the first question, whether or not it's worth it, I think absolutely. It's a safe bet, and it's an excellent value at around $250 after shipping. There are better handhelds out there. They're bigger screens, they're more power, but there's nothing that rivals it at this price point. It's got a lot of excellent features, and it's hard to find any faults, and even if I do find something I don't like about it, like the plastic texture or the smudginess or the fact that the 5-inch screen is a little bit small with more modern games, many of those feel more like a personal preference than an actual fault. So the way I see it, if you're looking to get a handheld around the $250 price point, you want something around this size and you want to get as much power as possible for your money, then the Retroid Pocket 6 is an excellent and easy recommendation. Now, the second question was whether or not it's worth upgrading to if you've already got something very similar. And the way I see it, the Retroid Pocket 6 is kind of like a smartphone in that regard. The newest version of any phone will always be the best one, but it may not be worth upgrading if you've already got something similar. For example, I've got an iPhone 15 and I think it works out great. It's showing its age in some ways, like the battery is not holding its charge the way it used to, but at the same time, I'm not quite ready to upgrade to the iPhone 17. Maybe the iPhone 18 will be the one that I get. Along those same lines, if you've got a handheld that can mostly do everything the Retroid Pocket 6 can do, then it's probably not worth spending $250-ish to get this upgrade right here. After all, these devices are designed to play retro games, and I bet that if you've got something similar, you have not played every retro game that that device can. So it might be worth just kind of focusing in on the games that you can play with that device, and then once you're ready to move on and try something else, then it might be worth picking up the Retroid Pocket 6 or the 7 or the 8 and so on. So it really comes down to two camps of people, those who have never picked up a handheld before, and I think that those people will love the Retroid Pocket 6. This thing is magical in all the right ways. And I think that Retroid has redefined what it means to be a handheld at around the $250 price point. If this is your budget, then this is the device to get. At the same time, there are so many other similar handhelds out there that I can't say this is a must buy, especially if you've got something that can get you most of the way there. And knowing how these companies operate, in a few months, we're going to be making a similar video about a similar product that can maybe do a couple things the Retroid Pocket 6 couldn't. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you going to pick up a Retroid Pocket 6? Do you already have something similar to it, or is this going to be your first handheld? As always, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful. We will see you next time. Happy gaming.